Welcome back to Lit versus Genre, everyone. I am Steve,
And I am Jeff.
and we are now jumping into the head of everyone's fan favorite character, Nyneave. Today, it's the Nyneave show today, Jeff.
Obviously the fan
of,
favorite.
of course, because who else would it possibly be besides our friend Nyneave, expert
hmm
tracker.
Expert
Nyneave.
tracker, indeed.
Uh, so yeah, I think the thing that I'd be interested in talking to you about today are these choices of whose perspective you're gonna get. Because again, I'm still kind of in this sort of zone where I don't know how many POV perspectives we're gonna get. I don't know who
Right,
he's gonna pick for
right.
POV perspectives. I'm imagining he can't do everybody, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Ah, no,
So
sorry. I'm definitely
cackles,
cackling over.
cackle, cackles in evil.
Uh, yeah.
So I'm really
Yeah,
interested by
but,
this choice. I mean,
right.
like the parent choice made a lot of sense. He's one of our three in the running for Golden
Sure.
Child, but
Exactly.
but Nynaeve is sort of an interesting choice here, and I feel like I have some theories for why
Mm.
he's picking who he's picking, and if this theory is correct, then maybe some predictions about who he won't pick for
Mm.
POV, and I'll be happy to go on record for that because I'm always happy to go on record with
There we go. Let's do it.
predictions. But
Always love the state predictions. Always love it.
yeah, but what did you think of this chapter? Coming
Uh,
back to it.
well, yeah, I mean, reading it now again is just a joy for me. I do try to think back to like decades ago, like how did I feel? And I was even talking to my wife about this because she just recently read the entire series,
Mm.
and she was saying how excited she was to get the Perrin piece and then the Nynaeve piece after and start or Nynaeve piece after it and start to this world expanding, right? To
Mm-hmm.
to get to get more people's point of views. And I was like, yeah, I really think that's how I felt too. It was like it felt like the world was unlocking and kind of opening up
Mm-hmm.
as we're getting more. It's of course shocking to a degree, right? Because we've had so many pages with just Rand, but then it's like, oh, cool, now I get to see more because some of the other characters can be more interesting than Rand to a degree,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, and that can eventually happen later too. But anyway, so I really enjoyed this. I too have some theories about why he picked Nynaeve.
Mm.
I feel like I should let you say yours first though, since you're the new reader for it, right? And then I can say the reason I think that he chose. What are you thinking as why Nynaeve?
Okay, well, picking up on your comment that maybe
Mhm.
some of the perspectives would be more interesting than Rand at a certain point. Do you think Nynaeve is one of those?
No, I think no one was expecting Nynaeve. If I was to pick it, Nynaeve definitely feels like the side character who came in, like, oh, Nynaeve came to visit them at the tavern. Nynaeve
Right.
wants to, okay, cool. I mean, I guess that feels real, sure, sort of. And she's this very dissenting opinion, creating conflicts with the Aes Sedai's plan, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, cool. But then you turn and get her, and it's like, what, Nynaeve? So
Right.
yeah, no, yeah, so I think, but I think that's by design. That does relate to um, why I think that it was picked personally.
Interesting. Because I was sitting there thinking, like, okay, whose perspective would I be less interested in than Nynaeve's? And I really couldn't come up with it. I was like, I hate Tom, but it would certainly be a trip to be in his head. And I don't
Right.
think we will be in his head if my, guiding principle is correct here, which it might very well not be. But like I have my suspicions that we will not be in his head. Um and then I was like, who else? I Matt annoys me, but maybe that would be interesting to like figure out what the hell his thought process is. That idiot.
hmm
Perrin. Okay, Perrin seems kind of like just a wet log right now, but like there's not like a lot interesting about him. But he's one of the three, right? So that's kind of
Right.
interesting. Um, Moraine and Lan, okay, well, I'll just kind of get into it. I think there's like, Jordan wants to keep air of mystery about certain characters and not about other characters.
Yeah.
And that's gonna guide a lot of like who we get to go into their head. So even though it would be infinitely more fascinating to be in Moraine's head or be in Lan's head, I'm like, it's not gonna happen. It's never gonna happen. Well, maybe much later, but not until like Mysteryverse is unwound a little bit more, you know, because like you kind of can't be in certain characters' heads without and maintain a mystery because characters are keeping information from the reader. Right. So I was like, okay, we can't be in theirs. And then I was like, I think actually the one that I would most interested to be in their head right now is Egg.
Yeah, I thought that's who you'd pick.
Because she's the one, and this got me back, she's the one person besides Tom who has chosen to go on this journey. Who, like, chose to do this. And I want to, like, cycle back to Tom again because that also made me think. I was thinking, like, why am I so suspicious of Tom? And everybody in the comments of the videos are like, you shouldn't be so suspicious of Tom. But I think that's what made me so suspicious of Tom. I'm like, why did he choose to go with them? Like, I don't get it. But I do get kind of why Egg did, right? And she's the one who's had this, like, major life change and that she's had agency in that major life change. So that, when I was thinking, like, whose perspective would I want to be in, hers does seem the most interesting to be in. And I also feel like it's impossible we're not going to be in hers in some point. Like, my prediction is we will get hers, especially the fact that she's been cordoned off from everybody now. We're going to, like, jump over and she'll be, you know, in a Trolloc cage somewhere or something like that. But, like, I just feel certain we're getting her. And, like, out of all of them, I was like, I think Nyneave is the one I'm the least interested in to be in her head right now.
Well, and I can't wait to talk about, like, obviously reactions to being in. Nyneave said, you know, for this, which we'll get to right after this. But I would agree with what you're saying, which is I think this is a delay tactic, personally, in that he doesn't want you to see the other stuff yet. He wants you to be living in the world. He wants things to be, like, moving, right? But he wants you wondering, how is Perrin on the other side of the river? He absolutely wants you wondering about Egwene, right? Because that's the subject of conversation in this chapter, right? And that they're basically abandoning her. So the whole thing is like, what about Egwene? And I completely understand what you mean about, like, character choice and agency. And don't listen to anyone in the comments about Tom. I love that you're suspicious of Tom. Keep going with your gut reactions on this stuff. I think it's great to see, you know, these different perspectives. And I do get why you feel that way, because it seems like he's putting himself in this incredibly dangerous situation. Why, right? Like, you know, Nyneave, at least we can understand because Nyneave grew up with him. Like, she's supposed to be the caretaker. So, I mean, obviously it seems like she's going well outside her job description with the length she's going, right? But that does seem to tie back to her, like, two of her stubbornness. Whereas Tom, it's like, just why, you know? So I think there is this question that can lead someone down this route of, like, we learn about dark friends that are impossible to kind of know who they are and everything. So, you know, wouldn't it be perfect for there to be a dark friend that's with this crew and, you know, keeping track of them in an unsuspecting way and leading the boys to, you know, Shadowlogos, not Shadowlogos, to the Blight and all that. But anyway, so I get your reasoning with agency, and I think it's great, and I think we should follow it until we get something that you know makes us go one way or the other. But Egwene, I think, is a very classic hero, especially in today's sense. I feel as if, you know, if this book was pitched now of like, oh, it's a reluctant hero, and it's like, been there, done that. We've seen the reluctant heroes. Right. That, you know, get power, but they don't want the power, so on and so forth. Now, one, I do think it is realistic, and that's what Robert Jordan went on record as saying, like, he wanted to write. He wanted to write a story where people came in and were like, hey, one of y'all might be the chosen one. And they're like, no, thanks. That sounds terrible. Like, that sounds awful. I'm going to do everything I can to get away from that. That sounds, you know, like something I don't want to do. But these days, we're much more in the, like, you know, choice and power of choice, and we like characters who make choices, and we're doing things, and that's Egg, right? Like Egg's like, I want out of this two-horse town. I want to experience the world. Forget what you say, Rand. I don't want to get married to you. I want to go be an Aes Sedai. You know, like if people are like, but Aes Sedai, we don't like them. She's like, I don't care. Like, you know, Egwene's pretty awesome, you know, in terms of what she wants and what she's going after. And so I think it's natural that we do want to hear about Egg. And I think Robert Jordan knows that. And that's why he's delaying us getting to see her, because that becomes a page turner. Obviously, it could be annoying for some people, but I think it drives others to keep reading.
I'm really excited to hear the playback of the audio of this, because when you went, world, like it totally peaked out. I think it's going to be epic. It's going to be epic.
I'm breaking things.
Totally. Yeah, that's very true. And I wonder, this is sometimes, again, something that happens when you try to, you know, this is obviously not like a super old book, but it's been around for decades. And like sometimes I feel like, you know, when I try to watch a really old movie, you know, like a movie from like the 40s or 50s or something that's supposed to be a classic, a lot of times you can't appreciate it because what it was doing became so copied that it feels done, you know, to death now. And so because of the time when you're hitting it, it's not going to have the same impact as it did at the moment. So like, yeah, that idea of like, ooh, what if I have a chosen one who doesn't want to be a chosen one? And like at the time, 1990 or whatever, that was probably like, oh wow, what a fun twist on it. And now I feel like everybody's kind of, not everybody, but a lot of people have done that now at this point. So it's not really hitting me with that like same force.
No, completely. And it's so crazy to think about that, but it's absolutely true that you could watch the classic that the other stuff came from and it can feel derivative.
Right.
And it's just like, wait, what?
Yeah.
It's funny. Brandon Sanderson actually has a character in one of his books that kind of has a meta conversation about this, that to like be a great artist or whatever, it just means that you were the first to do something like there that is perceived as good, because that what makes you then like stand out in time, right? But even as we're saying, depending on when you read it, if you hit it in reverse order, you know, then it actually doesn't work out that way. So yeah, no, it is. It's fun to think about that. It's just a quick aside, that something I've recently sort of stumbled on that I thought you were going to say, which is that sometimes when I'm watching older shows or even reading older novels, the writing style can feel dated, and that's not necessarily the way people speak anymore. So it can feel, in some cases, harder to get connected to the characters. And I feel like we're seeing this a lot with the explosion of a lit fantasy and also isekai, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but isekai is a sort of a storytelling element that's used in a lot of like Japanese anime or mangas, where someone dies in our world and then they're reborn in a fantasy world or another world. And so these are, I mean, they're just blowing up. And not in traditional publishing, because traditional publishing, for some reason, doesn't want to jump on these markets that are huge. But anyway, the point I'm getting at is, I think the reason why people like reading about people from our world in a fantasy world, and this has been going on for a while. I mean, this is what portal fantasy is, you know, where someone's sucked down the drain and they pop up in a fantasy world or whatever. But the reason I think people like that is because then someone's talking the way they're used to talking. Plus it's this getting to experience it. Obviously, lets the author explain everything, right? Because the person is coming to the world, they're, you know, 20 or whatever, but they still need to know what everything is because they're basically a baby in that world, you know?
Right.
So it obviously gives the author this chance. But I think it's just this interesting thing, because I've seen people read on Reddit, I've read people talk on Reddit about why they like this sort of writing. It's because like, oh, I like reading about someone who thinks in the way I would think. You know? And so it came into my head when you were talking about older things. I thought you might talk about the potentially dated aspect of communication or the way we speak or think, and how that, I think, affects what people like to consume to a degree. I think some people like to read things that are outside of their norm to get a different perspective. But then I think people like to read things that can feel very grounded or very realistic to them.
Right.
So,
yeah. Anyway. And well, no, that's an interesting point, because I wonder if that's another I mean, we're always searching for these somewhat tenuously, but like another differentiation of lit versus genre writing and what people are reading for, because I very much feel the opposite. Like, I think voice is so important, and like I want the voice to sound different, to sound,
Right.
I would use the word interesting, because if it's like, my everyday voice, I'm just not as interested in that voice.
Well,
So I don't
I,
know. That's kind of an interesting point.
I was gonna say, I feel like I know this was an aside, but I think that ties perfectly what we're talking about here because Nynaeve's voice, I think, is or her viewpoint on things is different than other people we've read because she's very combative.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, what did you think of Nynaeve?
Yeah, well, let's get into her combativeness a little bit. Yeah, I mean, this we get kind of the same beats that we've been getting, right? Of her being distrusting of Aes Sedai, and she's kind of coming in like already
Right.
pre-mad at Moraine.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh
then
yeah.
she gets this revelation, which I guess this was obvious because, like, yeah, I guess we just didn't, like, I didn't sit there and theorize enough about it, but Moraine had already said there were two, and I did bring that up when we did that chapter when they were
Hmm.
at the, Woodland Hilton or whatever that they were
Right.
in, that there were two of them, and, like, I was like, oh, okay, who's the other one? And I think, like, as I was reading it, I was like, it can't be Nynaeve. I mean, like, that would just be, like, too much. But then when Nynaeve
Right.
shows up, I just didn't think back to that conversation. I should have been like, well, of course it's Nynaeve if, she's the
Hmm.
one who's now here. So now Nynaeve has to, like, kind of deal with this revelation that she is the thing she herself hates
Hmm.
for no
Hmm.
good reason. That is sort of interesting, but like I guess I'm still having trouble with this hatred. I really can't, and I've said this before, and I don't know,
Oh
people
yeah.
in the comments will get on me for it, but I can't feel in my bones this hatred. Especially like after now they have been in, like, Nynaeve was there when Moraine saved everybody's ass. She was right there. She saw it
Right.
happen. There was an army of Trollocs and she made fire and earthquakes happen. And it's like,
Right.
and then also like even her explanation for like why I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Why are we not sticking around to find egg? Very good reasons. Nynaeve has no response to that. No, she essentially agrees with her about her reasoning.
Right.
She agrees to go with them. And
Right.
so like it's like, girl. So then when she gets to the end here and she's like, I am not only am I like mad that I have this power, but I'm going to use this power against you. I was just like, whoa,
Yep.
you've done like a massive 180 degree here thing, like where you're like, oh no, I don't want to admit to myself that I have this power because it's the thing I hate. Oh,
Right.
actually, I am going to use this power and I'm going to use it to kick your ass. It's just confusing to me. Like, I don't get her. I don't really understand. And it feels a little bit to me like ginning up conflict because, and this happened
Mm.
a lot, like, I feel like in workshops and things that I've been in where every instructor is like, there's got to be a conflict. Even in just like popular culture, I think like if you just interviewed random person on the street, like, what do you have to have in your story? And everybody would be like, conflict, because we've had it all drilled in your heads. You need to have that. And so then what happens a lot is somebody's like, I need to insert the conflict in here. I need to make sure there's
Mhm.
conflict happening between my characters right now. And then like they overextend because there's not like a good reason why there should be conflict right here. So it comes off as like inauthentic. Like characters have to kind of act weird or think weird things that they wouldn't normally in that situation in order to manufacture the conflict. And that feels kind of to me like this. Like I can't buy that Nynaeve's so especially with everything she learned and everything that's happened and everything that she's experienced at this point, that she's so like, oh, I'm going to kick your ass, Moraine, even though she's also like, well, yeah, she's right. This is what we gotta do. It's like, come on, which is she right, or are you gonna kick her ass? You know, like, I don't get it.
Yeah, Nyneave is a divisive character.
Oh, in
and
the
it's
fandom?
not, yeah, in the fandom. So,
Tell us your
and
comments down below, everybody. How do you feel about Nyneave?
right, no, absolutely, please do. So yeah, no, people swing about their feelings about Nyneave over the course of the series. I would say that the commentary that you have provided, I see why you're saying that, and I absolutely want to get into it. I would say it's not the one that I see leveled at her the most often, but maybe it's something that people are feeling without realizing it. Because when you talked about like going up to someone on the street and saying like, what do you want in a story? I think they would say a lot of things that mean conflict. You know what I mean? I think they would say like, I want, someone to be trying to get something or falling in love or cool action scenes or neat fighting. But all those things would have some conflict in them to a degree. Like in order to find love, it is hard and you've got to overcome, in order to beat someone in a fight, you are literally in conflict with someone in that case, So I think that's underlying everything. So I do wonder if perhaps some people's dislike for Nyneave, for those who do, think it's certain reasons that, she's very combative or acidic or always angry, like in a chapter like this, right? How much of that is maybe because that anger doesn't feel justified to them. And they're not necessarily saying that, they more just sense it. And then so the anger feels inauthentic and so they don't like the anger.
Right.
I do wonder if that is happening. Because I do get your point. I know that throughout this series, and like I said, it's been just so fascinating for me to get to go back to something I love that obviously has so much to talk about, hundreds upon hundreds of pages of content, right? And see these various things, because I know since the beginning, it's been why do people hate Aes Sedai, right? Like, because I think there maybe, well, I shouldn't say maybe, I think there could have been more setup in the beginning as to why Aes Sedai are viewed in the way that they are, right? Like, I think it's pretty clear why male Aes Sedai are viewed the way they are because they destroyed the world. Like would you be okay? Would you agree that people being scared of male Aes Sedai or being worried about male Aes Sedai, like that part makes sense?
Yeah, I think if we were like with the Dragon Reborn right now or something was the one leading us through, like that would be like, well, yeah, you destroyed everything before and you went insane, and that's the myth. And so, I'm going to be really like touchy and scared of you. I didn't even realize, I thought Aes Sedai could only be women, like that word. If is a man who touches the one power also then considered an Aes Sedai?
They are. It's just that there's like only women now. You know what I mean? And it's like if they find a male channeler, then they're hunting him down, basically, right? But there used to be like back in the day. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's really a spoiler. Like you'll hear that eventually. But I think what we're operating with is like that side of things is, I believe, relatively clear. But the female Aes Sedai, I think, is where things get stickier, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like different people seem to have different views, right? Where we hear that Aes Sedai manipulate, what they say is the truth, but it's not the whole truth, and that they can be, some view them as dark friends. So I think it's realistic that there's varied beliefs about things. Like this is like the politics of their world, right? Like just like people have varying views, Democrats and Republicans, for instance. I think people have very varied views about Aes Sedai and whether or not they're okay. I mean, we've got the White Cloaks that are hunting Aes Sedai down, basically. We've got, cities that they go to where they need to disguise that they're Aes Sedai, but then there's a whole Aes Sedai city, right? Like Tar Valon that they're going to. And then you've got some people in town that are like when they were in the Two Rivers that were very distrustful of her being an Aes Sedai, right? When it was revealed, other people that were thankful. So I feel like that's what we're getting into, that it's not a cut and dry, everyone has the same response to Aes Sedai. And what we're seeing here is that Nyneave does have a very sort of a strong bias against Aes Sedai. Of course, the question, at least to me, is why, right? I think perhaps if that was clear, why Nyneave falls in the spectrum of views of Aes Sedai on this highly negative side, equating them to Dark Friend. There's literally one line where she says, Dark Friend Aes Sedai. So in her mind, they're like the same. So when, or close to the same. So in her mind, she views, Moraine as the cause of a lot of these problems, wrapping up these kids in her thing. But she is also fighting with her own beliefs, as you're saying, right? That, she experiences the Trollocs running away from her because she's not their quarry, right? Like she realizes that there is something going on.
Right.
Just like she realizes that she does have this power, even if she doesn't want to have it. So I think what we're seeing here is a very hard-headed character being faced with ways that she's wrong, and dealing with that. So it's almost like an unreliable narrator to a degree, because she's so opinion heavy. So I think, I know I just said a lot of stuff, so I'm going to stop talking, but those are my reactions. Yeah.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me, and yeah, that could be compelling. Like, there's definitely this central idea that, like, okay, you've spent your whole life kind of hating this thing, but you suspected you were it the whole time. And she, as Moraine kind of goes through these clues, I was like, dang, girl, come on, what were you thinking? Like, clearly you knew that you had this power. But that is like a really fascinating dilemma. But you're right. I don't think I've gotten like enough of where this bias is. I think I got a lot of lip service about it, and then I'm supposed to just feel it and accept it when like all the evidence to me as a reader has gone in the opposite direction. Like all the evidence, so it's like hard to be like, yeah, I get this bias.
Yeah, no, I would agree, because again and again we've seen Moraine prove herself, right? Like, it's not as if she's done a lot of sneaky things. Like the hardest, sure, she's withholding information, right? But it's not as if she's solving problems in ways that you could go, but wait, was there something evil on the underside of this, right? Like, she's doing things in a very logical way, and will even explain herself in a logical way, right? I do think this also points something interesting for the two of us. I think we are relatively logical people, right? Like that, don't get me wrong, obviously we have emotions as well. But I think Moraine can appeal to readers like us, where she lays things out and we're like, yeah, no, that makes sense. Like, she's thought it through. She's thought through both sides. But not everyone is like that. People, can make decisions more from an emotional perspective. And I think that's what we're also seeing with Nyneave. Like, she hates the idea of leaving someone behind, but she can't argue with the rationale, but she hates that she can't argue with the rationale, So it does become an irrational response, right? And so reading someone like that is tough. I do think in a way it's right that Jordan waited this long, right? If we were reading Nyneave from the start, would people be okay with this? Would people have got reading, right? But that we get her later and that she's so antagonistic. You could disagree with her, you could agree with her, but how much do we like her? I think that's, again, very up in the air initially. Like, she's not presented as a super likable character. She even wants Lan to fail, right? She's very petty in the, like, it would have been nice if he couldn't have found the horse so quick. And then, like, how dare you, like, mock me for crying? It's like, Lan's just giving you the horse. What are you talking about, right? But she feels very consistent in that way. And to me, while I don't necessarily like Nyneave in this one, I do enjoy getting this very different voice. As you were saying, it's interesting to me to be in someone's head that does seem so emotionally driven and does seem to have these conflicting feelings that I feel I've met people like this over time. So even though it can seem illogical and thus perhaps not true, to me it does ring true of how a person could be in life. Though I do get what you're saying from a more basic character standpoint, it could seem confusing and like, who is this person?
Yeah.
Especially because we don't know where this bias comes from.
I feel like this. What would be more compelling to me is if she has some awareness of her inner conflict, right? Or that inner conflict was playing out. Because right now, there might be inner conflict playing out, but she's unreliable. I'm just getting the antagonistic side of it.
Right.
But if I'm
right.
only getting the antagonistic side of it, like I don't then feel the inner conflict. I have to kind of imagine that's what's going on behind the scenes. Whereas
Right.
I wonder if I would be more interested if she was like just really struggling with her feelings right here. We're in her head. Like, why not have her doubting herself here at this point and being like, weighing those things, kind of going like, I think would be realistic in this situation where I'm like, oh gosh, I every instinct tells me to not trust this person, but then again, she's saved me 3 times, and that's the conflict that we're getting in the chapter. And I feel like I would be, and when you talked about likability, because that's kind of interesting, another interesting discussion that like I don't think being likable, I think being interesting is more important than being likable. Like if the character is interesting in that way, then they don't have to be pleasant. In fact, a lot of times the most quote unquote likable characters are the most unpleasant character, right? But they're unpleasant in a way that's fascinating and interesting and compelling. So like likability gets thrown around a lot. I just don't think likability is a lot of like likability as in someone you would want to be friends with is at all valuable in a character at all. I mean, I know I make these huge pronouncements and there's always going to be exceptions to them, but like I don't think that matters. I think compelling matters.
Oh, I would agree. I think we like to read someone that is interesting. You know what I'm saying? Like that's what makes us want to read about this compelling individual, as you just said. And I think that's why we see the reactions we do to Nyneave in the community, because I think, relatively speaking, we could say that she is unpleasant, right? And so operating with this huge bias, right? That we don't know the driving force for. Besides the fact that just, it seems like in this world people have differing opinions about Aes Sedai, right? And because of that, she's not necessarily interesting. Like she's thrust into an interesting scenario. Like I think we're interested in Moraine and Lan, right? And so by putting Nyneave beside them, we would tolerate perhaps the Nyneave to get to see, okay, what are Moraine and Lan doing? Because I like am interested in those characters. So I do think there's some strategic choices going on, because I do think there is some value in creating a character that maybe isn't that great. And what I mean by that is like, that is not that interesting, that is unpleasant, that a reader may dislike. Now, obviously, you're writing a line with this. It's risky because if they're so unlikable or so uninteresting, the reader's not going to keep reading, right? The reader's going to be like, and I'm done with this book, right? And obviously, that's a continued sort of danger of multiple POV. And we see, people talking about Game of Thrones, that there would be characters that they would just skip because they don't even care about reading. Right? Yeah. They'd be like, okay, I'm just jumping over this chapter. I remember when I would hit Sansa chapters, I'd be like, Sansa, come on. I'd still read them. But my point here is that I think some of this, maybe all of it potentially, right, can be by design. And that Robert Jordan can know that perhaps he is creating an uninteresting / unlikable character. Maybe. Again, like I said, I do find her crazy conflicts interesting personally, but I think that there could be this knowledge of I'm creating an antagonistic character that people might have divisive opinions about. However, there could be 2 things happening in tandem. One, I'm placing her next to people that we are interested in. So we are then getting to see Lan and Moraine. Because I'm not going to let you get Lan and Moraine's perspectives, right, as you brought up before, but I'm going to let you stay near them. And so that's kind of like a second prize, if you will, as a reader. But then also, my bigger thesis here is I think there can be some value in creating a character that is not great to then see them change over time. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily, because I don't want to give spoilers for Nyneave. I think there's a larger conversation we can have about that kind of when we finish reading the book. But I do think there is something to be said about that. Now, obviously, in the best case scenario, you create someone that's interesting, but unlikable, and then we still see them change, right?
Yeah.
Into a different type of person that's still interesting. That's the ideal, of course, right? And I think that that's the struggle with Nyneave, is she's not necessarily that. But I do think that that's something that Jordan could have been going for.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. No, that's an interesting theory about that. Let's get into a few other points about this.
Oh, sure.
So one is that we got confirmation that the coins are just Moiraine's way to track them. So okay, cool.
Yep.
That's cool. This sentence I have highlighted because I think, well, we have the Robert Jordan ellipses. I'm just gonna, this should be like a whole like saying now. The Robert Jordan ellipses is just, it's just
is it different than what you're used to?
I think it is, yeah, because it's like it's like a way of like being like, oh, here's our next mystery that I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to trail off right when I'm about to tell you something important. But let me make sure that I have all my fantasy words right here. That Shao Ghul will hunt them. And that just means Dark One, right? Because he's stuck in Shangul. Okay, I expect.
Yeah. If we see the map, I want to say, you'll see that at the very top.
Right. We'll hunt them, I expect. Well, yeah, Moiraine, of course. I mean, that's what they've been doing the whole time. So I don't know what Moiraine is saying there, aside from like the blaringly obvious.
She's setting up the inevitable ellipses.
Yes, she is. So then opposition within the White Tower, that even from Amerlin's seat. Okay, so I know that's Aes Sedai. So, and Amerlin's seat is like the head of Aes Sedai, and opposition from them. So Moiraine feels like they're going to be opposed to Moiraine protecting the boys or bringing the boys to the city. Like there'll be people at Aes Sedai who are against that.
I mean, that is what this is indicating, yeah.
Right, and there are always Aes Sedai who will accept only one solution, and then the Robert Jordan ellipses. So what does that mean? And so, like, God, this is kind of whack, but, like, when I hear, like, one solution, like, my brain just goes, so other Aes Sedai besides Moiraine thinks we should just kill him, because we already kind of talked about gentling, which I don't know what that means yet. But like, so I guess I shouldn't ask you because it's a spoiler, and there's a reason Robert Jordan's putting the Robert Jordan ellipses right here.
There's a reason.
There's a reason. Okay, so here's my question. I pretty much have talked myself into being correct about this, that like, of course, a bunch of Aes Sedai will be like, we gotta kill these guys before they go crazy and destroy the world, because that is also a pretty logical thing to do. But again, what is the value narratively of the Robert Jordan ellipses? Isn't it more compelling and even more suspenseful for me to just be like, oh dang, I said this would even get me more on Nyneave, like understanding Nyneave a little bit better, or give Nyneave legs to stand on. If you're like, oh, I said I actually gonna kill these kids, and Moiraine's like the one who is like, I don't think we should do that. That's really compelling. Like, I'm really interested in that. Why pussyfoot around it?
I mean, I think it's a conflict between kind of real conversations versus providing information so readers have it. And I think there's value on both sides, right? Like, obviously, my acting teacher, one of my acting teachers, used to say, like, theater is not about the day that nothing happened.
Yes.
And I think that's, of course, true for all these stories that we tell, right? Like, obviously there is, we see success with slice of life, which is more of here's the day something. But something is still happening in the slice of life, right? And so...
Dude, did you ever see the movie Adaptation?
Yes.
Do you remember
so
the
good.
Brian Cox? He's playing that guy who like wrote those kind of writing self-help books. They're like really famous. God, I can't
Right.
remember. I have his book on my bookshelf. I don't remember his name right now, but he's playing that guy. I love the
Oh,
monologue.
Tony Robbins.
No, not Tony Robbins. Crap. What's his name? It's specifically
Oh,
screenwriting that his book is
oh,
about,
right.
and
Okay.
I'm never gonna get it. I know it's nowhere in my
Okay.
brain, but
Oh, Save the Cat? Are you talking about?
no, I'm not talking about that one either.
Okay. We won't, I won't keep guessing.
Yeah,
Brian Cox, go for it.
you can look up his character because literally in the movie,
Right.
they just made him that guy. They're like, oh, he's that guy.
Right,
But
right.
his monologue is like so great, and it's exactly about that. And what's funny is like that movie's about what's his name. The screenwriter not wanting to make a movie like that, like not wanting to make a movie where something happened, and he
Right.
does it like every day a man betrays his own brother every day, and he just
Right.
like goes through this list, and of course Brian Cox is an amazing actor, but I'm like watching that scene, I'm
Yeah.
like, preach, brother, preach. Big things happen, let's go.
Right. So I definitely get that. That stories are going to be about things that we want to read, and as we were talking about before, generally people want to read about these interesting, conflicting, sometimes larger than life scenarios. But what value if we're in like Moraine's head? Why would Moraine ever tell Nyneave that here? I hear you that knowing that would, but I think what's happening is we see Moraine even say if you watch the wolf too hard, a mouse will bite you, right? And I think what she's trying to say there is that she's got these bigger concerns, that there are these
Right.
larger things she is worried about, and that's why she's kind of rambling about them, because they're in this unfortunate situation where she's lost these kids that could be the key to the world being destroyed, right? And then she's like, okay, I got to get back to what I really need to think about, because there's more immediate, like the mice right beside me that I need to like handle, which is go find the kids, or even Nyneave, right? So I think that's what's being shown here. So I hear you. Yeah, that's just not the nature of this sort of story, right? Like that's just not the style that these things are just said. I mean, we do get the big things like, Trollocs invade the two rivers, right? Like massive crazy thing happening, And I do hear you that there are these moments where we do find out big things, and I'm not just meaning in Wheel of Time, but in stories that sell it for me. Like I was just reading in writing group someone else's story where I learned that there's this whole other place with these like creatures and everything. I was like, oh my goodness, why did I know about this like chapter 1? Like I would have been freaking out just with the ideas that could have spun in my head about it. So
Right.
like I hear you, I do. It just feels like a tough line to walk, right? Like what's true for the character to keep them real and grounded? Is it better to give a small mystery in this case? Now we're wondering, oh my goodness, what sort of conflicts are going to happen at Tarvalon? Or should it be signposted more to justify the way Nynaeve's acting, right? Like it feels like there's all these cost benefits. But I love that you're bringing them up, because it's fascinating to think as that writer making those choices. And how many
Right,
choices are
right,
we
right.
aware of in the moment?
Right.
Like, are we weighing the scales in the moment? Do we even know in all cases, right? And if we do, what is that like? It's a fascinating thing to do as a writer.
Yeah.
Since we both write, right? We know.
And I mean, I keep coming back to this because I keep feeling, and this was a bias before we were reading it, but I feel like everything, maybe these things are self-perpetuating, but I'm more and more against these little mysteries as we go along. Because wouldn't it be rad? So Nynaeve's overhearing, and Moraine doesn't realize Nynaeve's overhearing, and that's why she's saying this, and that's why she cuts herself off, of course, right at the moment that she's about to say something that would reveal the mystery. Wouldn't it be more rad if she does let something slip before realizing Nynaeve's there? Nynaeve now knows that Aes Sedai want to kill the boys. And she has that knowledge. And now everything else that's going to happen is going to happen with her with that knowledge. And like, that just seems really rad to me, and really like open to a lot of like cool possibilities, maybe even making me understand her aggression here. a lot better than the way I understand it now. Like, it seems good. It seems like a really, really rad. Whereas like, another mystery that I'm just supposed to unravel just doesn't seem that rad to me.
I guess I'll answer this question with a question. How did you feel learning that the way the Moraine was tracking the boys was the little tokens, or learning that the way Nyneave found them at the end? Because I know we had talked about that before.
Right.
Like, how the heck did Nyneave find them,
Right.
right? How did you feel getting the moments where we learned that Nyneave found them because she had healed one of them? Or even that when Nyneave is trying to track them and can't, but then Lan tries to track them and can't either, it shows this continuation of her like tracking. Like, do those reveals or continuing to live in that perspective do anything for you as a reader?
Are you ready, Jeff?
I'm just curious.
Are you ready?
Bring it. I know the answer, I think, but I have to check, right?
What's my answer? What's my answer?
Your answer is absolutely freaking out.
Do
you care much more about
not
every day
care.
a brother betrays a brother. Every day. Right. No, I know. That was...
Do not care. And even more, and even to go beyond that, like, those things, especially in this chapter, feel like they're just there to further prop up this plot hole of why Nyneave found them. You know, like, it doesn't really seem super important that she's a great tracker. It's really there to explain something in the plot. Like, why do I care that she's a great tracker? I, like, don't really care about that. It's literally just there to justify her being here.
Right.
So that's kind of why I don't care about that.
Yeah, I think, like we talked about before with the tracking, it would have been good. So this is, I think, out of everything we've talked about, I think this is one of the main ones that I do, like, feel. And of course, you know, hindsight is 2020. I mean, I wish I could, you know, have someone go through my books and do all this. Actually, would I even want someone to go through my book in a way that you and I are? Where I'd be like, oh my goodness, there's so many things they got to fix, right? Because it's never going to be perfect. But I do think having a moment of learning about, you know, Nyneave's dad being like the best tracker ever, or a moment of her like being a cool tracker before it mattered, would have been really nice. Because now I would agree that I think Jordan's doing a good job of continuing to make it part of her character.
Right.
But it does seem like it stems from that original need to explain, as you're saying.
Well, here's another thing that I'm a little different, I think, from maybe a lot of readers, maybe the majority of our listeners I'm different from in this way. But and I've talked to you about this before. You know that I kind of don't care about plot holes. And like I kind of don't care about them if the things that I really love are in the story. Like I will go along with Nyneave suddenly as a tracker and found them. We don't have to keep hitting it to convince me of it. I'll go with it if there's other stuff about Nyneave that I'm really jazzed about.
Right. What I think is interesting is he's got a secondary explanation, right? The secondary explanation is that she can sense people she's healed, right? So if he wanted, it could have just been that, right? I mean, now we bring in the question, like, how far does that extend, right? Because she like said she's healed like hundreds of miles away, but it could have just been a yes, right? And then it could have just been this drop of, oh yeah, by the way, you can sense people you can heal. That's how you found us. Didn't you wonder how you found us, right? So you know, I do think it's interesting, but I think what a lot of what Robert Jordan is doing is he's trying to give secondary explanations, right? In that, you know, the idea, I think, isn't that Nyneave knew this whole time or even really could have known that she was an Aes Sedai, because there is this mythology in these, you know, outskirt towns about listening to the wind, and some people are good at it and some people aren't. And they don't necessarily associate that with having the power. Or, you know, I healed someone and I just thought I got lucky, or it was just a moment, right? And so then it becomes this moment where it's all crashing into her. It's a tricky chapter to do, though. Like if someone was like, hey, I need you to write a chapter where we're learning about all this like character's backstory and someone's revealing someone's backstory. And it's the first chapter we've ever been in this person's head. And it's all got to feel like legit and real. And we got to feel the weight of time and the realization that this has happened to her, the whole scale. Like that seems really hard to achieve. It feels like a lot of reversing time and explaining stuff. And I would say that I think, for me at least as a reader, that Jordan pulls it off. I do feel like when they have that, like he does it within the chapter. He my favorite part, I think, is when Moraine says, "Don't you remember how I asked you if you were the wisdom?" And there was nothing to prompt that, right? And then we later get Nyneave thinking back to that moment of her talking to her, and then Moraine just suddenly pausing and out of the blue, and then we get the Robert Jordan ellipses right there, and then asking that thing. So I feel like he does achieve some of this, us getting to see things in the past from characters that we were not with, that I feel is successful here. But at the same time, I do also understand that you don't care about any of that stuff if you don't like Nyneave, and it doesn't even matter, right? It's just all like justifications and slitting stuff, where for me it's like, oh, the author knows what they're doing. They're gonna like retroactively fix things, so if I see something weird, there will be an explanation for it, and it makes me trust him more.
That's
right?
so funny
As a reader.
As we go on, let's cycle back to that conversation, because that's another conversation, the like plot hole conversation that like how much do readers really care about, you know, those and I know some people care very deeply about them.
I think I'm on that spectrum that I do.
Yeah.
I think we'll have to keep going and see, right? Because I definitely like when plot holes get filled. Maybe I don't mind plot holes, but I appreciate when the writer's like, no, I got you. There was a reason for that. And I would like them to be set up prior. Like, that's when I'm really like, okay, I'll tip my hat to the author on that one, right? But yeah, no, let's definitely revisit that, because I think it's something we can be watching for throughout.
I highlighted this line because I like it. Who said I was too young? Oh, girl.
Right?
Oh, girl.
Everybody.
Every single person.
I feel like that's a moment where we can like Nyneave a bit more.
I did like that. Lean into that. Lean into that lack of self-awareness right there.
Right.
So let's see. I think was there anything else that I wanted to say here?
Those are all my main ones, but feel free. Obviously, you got something else.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I want to talk about this. So this is the other thing that I was like a little bit like, what? Because you remember when Moraine was like, "Oh, Egg, you could be the queen of all the Aes Sedai," and I was like, "What?
Right.
No way." With training, you might become even more powerful than Egwene. and I believe she can become one of the most powerful Aes Sedai we've seen in centuries. So now both these girls are the future queens of the Aes Sedai. Whoa, dude. That's quite a coinky dink, I think.
Yeah, I mean, how do I even talk about this?
Because of future knowledge, you mean? Like,
because of future knowledge, and also how it ties to this like stuff we're talking about of the kind of retro fixes,
right?
And again, like some of them I do think are retro fixes, like with this discovery that Nyneave is a really good tracker, right? Like that to me was like, oh, but that it feels like you're just using that as an explanation for how she got it, right? Whereas other things I do think are legit, like this idea of like, oh, you heal someone, you can be them. Like, oh, cool, I just didn't know that, and that's a fascinating thing that does explain. Neat. So for this, it's like, it's hard to say, but I would agree that in this moment, heck yeah, it's like, wait, what? For me, the main thing that happens is, whoa, hold the phone. If Nyneave is like the most powerful Aes Sedai ever, and you thought that might be true, wouldn't you be bundling her up and taking her, as well, right? To like, wouldn't that be a priority? But I think what Robert Jordan is trying to get away with here, and I think is mostly successful from a reader perspective, is that there's bigger fish to fry. But like, yeah, it would be cool if we got some really powerful Aes Sedai, but these are like untraining, and like it might take longer for them to train to become the most powerful. Then we've got years for the world to exist, right? Like, if the world, doesn't she say like in an earlier part that they got maybe 5 years or something? So I think that's how Jordan gets around it, or at least the thing I'm saying of like, wouldn't it be more important to grab Nyneave if this is true? I think Jordan gets around it with like the top priority is keeping these kids away that could signal the end of the world. And so that's all she's got time to care about. While she's here with Nyneave, hey, by the way, this is something you might want to consider in case we last that long, is the idea.
Yeah. These are the future queens of the Aes Sedai right here.
Yeah, to the coincidence, I can't speak to that.
Well, I can't wait till that plot hole is wrapped up in a little bow for me later on. So excited.
All right. I mean, I think, as you're saying, there are a coincidence like that. I feel like, again, if we're liking it, if we're enjoying it, if we like Nyneave, right, then I think it's like, oh, cool. I'd be interested to see what Nyneave would do with tons of power. But right now, it's like, I mean, maybe we are. Like, if Nyneave gets tons of power, she's going to do what? Like, destroy Moraine and Tarvalon? Who knows? So, she's trying to resist being a dark friend. Will that make her a dark friend? So I do feel like there's some stuff there. And I do agree with you that he doesn't lean into those things. Like, he doesn't, like, yeah, he says, I'll use that power against you, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not made clear what that could lead to. Like, what would the fallout of that be? How realistic that even is? Mm-hmm. It feels almost like a childish want. She's pretty childish in this chapter, I did realize one last quick thing. Mm-hmm. Speaking of stuff and mysteries and whatever, there is this part which we didn't talk about. I'm just going to put a pin in this. I'm just going to say, let's remember chapter 21. Okay. And we'll revisit something here. I just wanted to mention it so it's official. I'm not saying it's anything that you need to go scouring for, but we are talking about these like mysteries, setups, what's retroactive, what's happened before, those types of things. And I think that this chapter is an interesting moment for that in both regards, in terms of explaining some things from before, setting some other things up, like the Nyneave thing we were just talking about. So 21 bookmarked.
All right. Sounds good. So we will cycle back to that. I will say real quick, Perrin incoming, everybody. So we'll see what happens.
I was
here.
Waiting. I know you called Perrin a wet log. So I am wondering
if he's wet. Literally.
If we turn the page and we're like, really? Like, I just got Nyneave. Why? Now I get Perrin? Where's Egwene? Give me Egwene. I think we'll talk more. Don't get me wrong. I end up liking these characters, but I think it's again interesting that Jordan is choosing who he is choosing for these moments. Right?
Cool.
Right. Well, more to come. Can't wait.
Thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you next time.
See you then.